The lungs lies in the thoracic cavity on the sides of the heart. Mechanism of breathing. Mechanism involves two stages: inspiration and expiration. Inspiration occurs with the pressure within the lungs. Inspiration and expiration. Okay. When the pressure within the lungs is less than, that is, there is negative pressure in the lungs with respect to atmospheric. It is initiated by contraction of diaphragm. which becomes flat and gets lowered. Thereby increases the volume of thoracic chamber. Okay, the contraction of external intercostal muscle lift up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber. Okay, the abdominal muscle relax and allow compression of abdominal organs by the diaphragm. The abdominal muscles play a passive role in inspiration. Increase in pulmonary volume, decrease the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the external layers, nasal cavities, internal layers, pharynx, glottis, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveolar ducts, alveoli. Intrapulmonary pressure. Alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues. Oxygen and CO2 are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly by concentration gradient. Solubility of the gases and the thickness of the membranes involved in diffusion are some of the important factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as PO2. PO2 for oxygen and PCO2 for carbon dioxide. Similarly, a gradient is present for CO2 in the opposite direction, that is from tissues to blood and blood to alveoli. Tissues to blood and blood to alveoli. As the solubility of CO2 is 20 to 25 times more than O2, the amount of CO2 that can diffuse to diffusion membrane per unit difference partial pressure is much higher as compared to O2. The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers. Thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, the endothelium, and the basement substance. Composed of a thin basement membrane supporting the squamous epithelium and the basement membrane surrounding the single layer of endothelial cell capillaries in between them. However, its total thickness is much less than a millimeter, therefore, all the factors in our body are favorable. A diffusion of O2 from alveoli to tissues and that of CO2 from tissues to alveoli. By the time blood leaves the alveolus, it has also the same partial pressure as the alveoli air. Transport of oxygen. Oxygen is carried by blood in two forms: dissolved gas in plasma 3% and as oxyhemoglobin by RBCs 97. Oxygen is soluble in plasma to small extent under normal conditions of temperature and pressure. About 3% of oxygen is transported by blood in dissolved form in plasma as oxyhemoglobin. RBC contain a protein called hemoglobin. It has four polypeptide chains. And can be written as HB4 and four hemogroups of atoms Rn in ferrous form. Thus, it can combine with four molecules of O2 to form Hb4O8. This is oxyhemoglobin. Hemoglobin has high affinity for oxygen, and this affinity is increased by fall in PCO2 of blood at the alveolus in lungs. Venous blood has low oxygen and is exposed to low PCO2 of alveolus. Thus, oxygen diffuses into RBCs and form oxyhemoglobin. As CO2 diffuses from blood to alveolus, blood PCO2 falls, increasing the further uptake of oxygen. The relationship between the partial pressure of oxygen and percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is graphically illustrated by the curve called the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. A sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against partial pressure of oxygen. The partial pressure of oxygen within alveoli is approximately 105 milligram Hg, and the partial pressure of oxygen of the blood leaving the alveoli is 100. This is because the blood plasma is not completely saturated with oxygen. The percentage of hemoglobin that is bound with O2 is called percentage saturation of hemoglobin. At this lower PO2, the percentage saturation of hemoglobin accounts for only 75%. The oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve is shifted either to left or right by various factors. Partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration, temperature, some of the factors. Shift to right indicate dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin. So this is a curve. This side is the partial pressure of oxygen and this percentage saturation of hemoglobin. So this is shift to left and this is shift to right. Okay, तो ये है तो शिफ्ट टू राइट अगर इस तरफ जाता है तो ऑक्सीजन हीमोग्लोबिन डिसोसिएशन कर्व इज shifted to right in following condition, that is decrease in partial pressure of oxygen, increase in partial pressure of CO2, increase in H plus concentration and decrease in pH, increase in body temperature, and then shift to left indicate in the fetal blood because fetal hemoglobin has more affinity for oxygen. Fetal blood, because fetal blood has more affinity for oxygen. Decrease in H plus concentration, increase in pH, alkalinity, decrease in partial pressure of CO2. Then we have transport of CO2. Okay, in dissolved form, bicarbonate and carbamino. Hemoglobin. Due to solubility of CO2, about 70% of it gets transported, dissolved in the blood plasma, and is carried to the solution to the lungs. Okay. Bicarbonate, the largest fraction of CO2, that is 70%, converted to bicarbonate. This is HCO3 minus. Okay. When carbon dioxide diffuses into RBC, it combines with water, forming carbonic acid. Okay. And then they dissociate into H plus and bicarbonate ion. Carbonic acid is unstable and quickly dissociates into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate. The given reaction is very slow in blood plasma but occurs very rapidly in RBCs because of zinc containing enzyme, the carbonic anhydrase. In the form of carbamino, CO2 also combines with amine radicals of hemoglobin to form carbamino amine radicals. 20 to 25%. ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਰੂਪ This is carbaminohemoglobin. At the tissue site, where partial pressure of CO2 is high due to catabolism, CO2 diffuses into blood and forms bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ion. At the alveolar site, where partial pressure of CO2 is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to formation of CO2 and water. The CO2 trapped as bicarbonate at the tissue level and transported to the alveoli is released out as CO2. Even 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of CO2 to alveoli. Regulation of respiration. The rate and depth of breathing is controlled by a group of neurons located in medulla oblongata and pons varolii. The medulla oblongata consists of dorsal respiratory group that mainly causes inspiration and ventral respiratory group that causes either both. Consists of pneumotaxic center. Pons consist of pneumotaxic center that limits inspiration. Under the control of the chemoreceptors located in the carotid bodies and aortic bodies. And we have some disorders: asthma, emphysema, occupational respiratory disorders. Asthma is difficulty in breathing causing wheezing, coughing, excess amount of mucus, excretion which may be clog the bronchi and bronchiole, in which emphysema is in which alveolar walls are damaged, due to which respiratory surface is increased. Decreased. In certain industries, especially those involving stone breaking, they have fibrosis. Thus causing serious lung damage. Silicosis and asbestosis are common examples which occur due to chronic exposure of silica and asbestosis dust in the mining industry. Workers in such industries should wear protective masks. ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਰੂਪ ਦੀ ਰਾਣੀ ਸਲੇਟੀ ਹੀਰ ਵੇਖੇਗਾ. The diaphragm is a specialized set of muscle, external and internal intercostal between the ribs, helping generation of such gradient in the mechanism of breathing.